Hey everyone, today I'm back in Final Fantasy XIV to talk about the Future's Rewritten Ultimate Raid. Normally I make these videos a lot closer to when we actually clear the fight, but because it's the holiday season and I have been just slammed at work, and then when I haven't been working, it's been either resting up to prepare for the next day or spending time with family because Christmas just happened a couple days ago as well. I didn't really have that much free time, so to speak, so that's why it took a little bit longer to get this video out there. But my group managed to clear the fight, well, is it like a week or two ago at this point? And then we also managed to do one re-clear on reset day itself, which we did right before we decided to take a break. And after we did that re-clear, honestly, I haven't even had the time to log back into the game to do the new MSQ that came out, well, a couple of weeks ago at this point. So that might be something for like after New Year's Eve is done, when I get some time there. But for now, just want to talk about the ultimate, kind of my experience going through it with Prog, talk about the fight itself, because I'm actually quite a big fan of how they decided to design this one, I guess you could say, because I think this is a pretty good ultimate. Some people didn't really like the difficulty of this one, same thing with the Savage Raid here, they felt like it was too easy. Now, just because this is an quote-unquote easy ultimate, doesn't mean that it's an easy fight by any means. It is still an ultimate after all. I do still feel like if I were to compare it to other fights on their release, it's probably not the easiest ultimate. I still think that Ultima Weapon is easier than this one. But this is definitely a very good entry point for people that are looking to get into ultimate raiding. Because one, it is current, so you can actually play it with your entire kit. And secondly, it is probably one of the easier ones out there. I think for me, probably Ultima Weapon is easiest, and this is like the second easiest maybe, because there are a few mechanics in there that are certainly going to take quite a while to progress through. Of course, things like the sim exist now though, which is something that we didn't have back in the old days. I think DSR is kind of like where that thing took off. But because the sim is out now for like the most difficult mechanics, like Ultimate Relativity and then most importantly Crystallized Time, I feel like progging through this one is going to be much easier than if you were to tackle some of the older ones. And outside of those two mechanics, honestly, this ultimate doesn't really have that many super difficult mechanics. If I look at phase 1, there isn't really anything that struck me as really difficult outside of maybe the tether mechanic, because if somebody mispositions there, or you're a little bit late, like running to the save spot, it's very easy to clip people there. Especially when you have thunder. Like if it's fire, it's like, okay, fire, it's whatever, we'll be fine. But if there's a thunder one, like even now to this day, and when we go for re-clears, I'll be like, oh no, thunder, please people position correctly. Because the amount of times that people have gotten clipped or have almost gotten clipped on the other side, it just do that much. So that's like really the only thing that I feel like you can really mess up on without like actually making a mistake in phase 1. Phase 2, Diamond Dust gave us a bit of trouble at the beginning, but now that we kind of know what to do there, it's a pretty like simple mechanic to get through. The rest of the phase is not too difficult either, because especially with the strat that we use for Light Rampant, it's so incredibly consistent with how we position ourselves for that, so it's really hard to make mistakes on that as well. Phase 3, Ultimate Relativity, was kind of like the big wall for us, like the first real big wall that we hit. Because there were a couple of different roles that we had to learn, and then there's quite a lot going on in the mechanic itself as well. But then once you get comfortable with it, I felt like it wasn't too bad. The second mechanic in phase 3 actually gave us a lot more trouble than I was kind of expecting, because the mechanic itself seems very straightforward, but because it requires quite precise timing and positioning, and also because it's not fixed and guaranteed where your positioning on the map is going to be, because sometimes you'll have to adjust to the other side of the arena, they kind of made it a lot more difficult to proc through than I was expecting, because people have to learn 4 positions instead of just the one, and then they also need to learn like how they're going to dodge into the middle of the arena from that position. Also, again, our tank is kind of a very important role here. I really do feel like this is the ultimate for tanks. If you're a tank player and you want to be challenged, this is definitely the ultimate for you, because tanks have a much higher role of importance in this ultimate than literally anybody else. Like, I'm just gonna put it out there, this is the tank ultimate. If there's ever been one, this is the one. But yeah, so second mechanic of phase 3 gave us a bit more trouble than I was expecting. Even now, like when we did our re-clear, our Dragoon ended up dying to it. We actually got really lucky on that re-clear as well, that everything just kind of like ended up working out. Because that pull should not have been a clear, but it just ended up working out, so that's all fine, I guess. Phase 4, first mechanic, much easier than I was expecting it to be. Again, pretty consistent to get through that. But then the second mechanic, crystallized time. That's the real difficult one and the biggest wall of the fight. Also, again, why the sim is just such an incredibly valuable tool for people that are willing to progress through this fight quickly. Because when we used it for like 2 hours, maybe 3 hours or something like that. And it literally saved us like 2 weeks of prog, I want to say. Because the mechanic is so deep into the fight. So it would have taken us a very long time to kind of like learn that mechanic in the fight itself. Of course, by the time that the sim actually came out and was usable, we were starting to get much more consistent up towards crystallized time. So it was kind of like perfect timing. Like by the time we got a little bit like used to the mechanic and then also got kind of consistent getting there in the first place, we could sim, and then after we did the sim for a little bit, we decided to change our strat a little bit as well. We're able to practice the movement, got kind of used to the mechanic, and then it was time to apply it to the real fight as well. Still took us quite a few tries to actually get through the mechanic in the first place, because even though you sim it, it's still going to be quite different in the fight itself. But it was definitely a huge help. And then from that point onwards, phase 5, honestly, in my opinion, phase 5 is not that difficult. It's literally just dodge Exaflares, which you always dodge them in the exact same way. The second mechanic is 100% carried by your tanks, everybody else has a very easy job there. And then the third mechanic is literally just stand left or right and remember to be in front of the conga line and then switch over. And you of course call that out as well. We always call it like tanks, melee, ranged, healer, and then people knew where to go, and then that was that. So overall, I feel like this ultimate didn't really have that many difficult mechanics. But overall, I did enjoy the mechanics, and I feel like that is much more important than there being difficulty just for the sake of difficulty. I also really enjoyed how clear a lot of the mechanics were displayed, I guess you could say. In top, a lot of the mechanics were very difficult to read, because a lot of the times you would have to go look into your party list. That also meant that auto marker is something that people used a lot for that ultimate, because it trivializes a lot of the mechanics. In this ultimate, I never really felt the need to like open up ACT for anything, like be it for voice line callouts, like for example, if I look back at UCOP phase 2, Nail, a lot of people back then used text-to-speech for the chariot, dynamo, spread, stack, those kind of things, because like who is going to remember all of these voice lines? Of course, people did it. Eventually, when I re-proctified, I learned all the voice lines as well, because at that point, I'll become a little bit more known in the community. People watch my streams and they were like, well, you're using ACT third-party programs? No, Mr. Streamer, you can't do that. So because of like a bit of a sense of pride, I guess, I was like, okay, I'm gonna just learn how that mechanic works, learn the voice lines or learn the keywords that you're looking for in the voice lines. And then I cleared that fight legit as well. But back then, when UCOP first came out, like 90% of people were using text-to-speech on ACT because it was just such a horribly implemented mechanic. And I still feel that if they were to actually add voice acting to the UCOP fight for the Nail voice lines, that would just be insane. Like the Nail phase would probably be my favorite ultimate phase of all time. Luckily enough, they ended up doing that for Futures Rewritten. So in phase 2, for example, there is a mechanic where she does either a dynamo attack or like a donut attack, or she does an away mechanic, a chariot attack. And for that, she has voice lines. So you can either look at the text bubble, you can look at the cast bar, or you can listen to the voice line, depending on what mechanic is gonna go on, and then you know how to react to that. So that was really fun. In phase 1 as well, the tether mechanic I talked about before, there are 3 different ways for you to identify on which mechanic is attached to the tether. Either you can look at the boss or the clone that is spawning in, you can see the lightning or the fire, you can listen for the crackling lightning or the whooshing fire around the clone, so you don't have to look at that either, or you can simply look at the tether, because the tethers are color-coded. Either there's a red fire tether, or there's like a red and blue mix of a thunder tether. So it was just really nice how clear a lot of the mechanics were, and you could do everything by just listening or by just like looking at certain like signs on the boss, like the colors tether or like the cleave or reap voice lines from Shiva, etc. And I think that's just a really good thing. There was just so much more clarity that something like Top, in my opinion, was severely lacking. So that definitely made progging this ultimate a whole lot more fun. Overall for Prog, I think my group did a really good job. We didn't really have that many roadblocks. Like, of course, there were certain mechanics that we struggled with for a while. But as soon as we kind of got past it, it was a pretty consistent Prog experience. It was kind of like we get to a new mechanic, we try it for a couple times, we get through it a couple times, and then like we got consistent on it, and then it's on to the next thing, which felt really good, because that is kind of like how that's basically how ideal Prog for me is. We just get to a new thing most of the time that we do pulls, and then we don't really regress in Prog that much, because that's something that would often happen in previous groups that I have played with. So overall Prog experience was pretty good. Might also have to do with the fact that the fight was a bit easier than expected. But overall it was a good experience. The fight itself was quite good as well. The theatrics surrounding the fight was also pretty cool. Like for example in phase 2, the intermission, like you have to save the darkness crystals because they're empowering Gaia so she can do a bunch of damage. Then in phase 4 you have to save the memory crystal because otherwise you can't move on to phase 5. Those kind of things. Like I just thought the entire design of the fight, the storyline throughout it, I thought it was pretty good. The weapons themselves I think are pretty good as well. The Sage weapons are definitely my favorite. They're a big winner in terms of the design. The glow is quite nice. Most of the base models of the weapons look pretty good as well. There's a couple of weapons out there that I don't really like that much. Like I think this time I'm probably not picking up the Warrior Axe because I'm not a huge fan of how the glow fits on the axe. But outside of Warrior, I feel like I think most of the weapons look pretty good. Maybe Reaper is another one I'm not too big of a fan of. But the majority of the other weapons look pretty good. So I'm gonna try and collect as many of them as I can before the group either gets bored of farming the ultimate or until like the next Savage tier comes out, because like we're on break at the moment because the Christmas holidays. I'm not quite sure when we're gonna get back to it, but I'm definitely interested in farming this ultimate until people are kind of bored of it, because the fight was pretty fun. I still enjoy playing Final Fantasy every now and then as well, of course. So right now it's a bit of a break on the game, but once the break is over, I do want to kind of play it a bit more again, do the ultimate, have some fun. And I guess I could talk about Bard as well. Ended up playing Bard for this ultimate, not really something that I initially was expecting to do, because I've mostly been playing Machinist and usually Dancer if I play ranged, and Bard has always been my least favorite. Going into Dawntrail though, when I did my level 100 impressions of Bard, I did mention that I enjoyed it a whole lot more, and if it ever came to a point where Bard would be the best option to play for my raid group, then I'd definitely be down to do that. And Bard just seemed to be like the easiest choice for this ultimate. Because of course Machinist, not really the best ranged in terms of its performance. It's probably better to play either Bard or Dancer, especially because we also have a Pictomancer. Now our Pictomancer might not be the best at his job, but it is still a Pictomancer, and Pictomancer completely shits on this fight. So playing a more buff-oriented ranged physical would kind of be the play here. And honestly, I had a very good time playing Bard as well. The first couple of days it was just kind of learning the class, getting into it, getting used to it. But once I got used to playing Bard a bit more, it was actually really fun to play. Army's Peon is still kind of boring, but outside of that the rest of Bard is pretty fun, and the burst feels incredibly satisfying as well. So definitely was a good experience getting to like play Bard in this setting as well, and kind of get used to another job again, because it's yet another job off the checklist that I have now progged an ultimate on. So it feels pretty good. Now, in terms of Pictomancer, I feel like that's something I should talk about as well. Pictomancer is kind of broken, and in a very bad way. So back when Savage released, Pictomancer was much stronger than every other class, and instead of nerfing Picto, they decided to buff everything else. And it kind of made the DPS check on the Savage raid tier completely irrelevant for week 1, which is why this tier probably has the highest clear rate out of every week 1 savages out there. It was kind of ridiculous. Now, going into Ultimate. Ultimate is a fight that generally has a lot of downtime in them, because the bosses fly away to do their mechanic, you do the little mechanical dance, and then the bosses come back. During that time, Pictomancer can paint the paintings. And if you're able to paint during downtime, you gain a lot of DPS. Another thing about ultimates is that once you know that you've met the DPS check for a specific phase, you now save resources for the next one to make the next phase easier. Again, Pictomancer can start painting at the end of the phase, because you're like, oh, we beat the DPS check, let me just start painting, because doing more DPS is quite literally useless to progress through the fight. So Pictomancer made a lot of things much easier than they should be, and I'm honestly not quite sure how they're going to be balancing this job going forward. If Pictomancer stays in the game in its current state, I feel like raids are gonna have to either be balanced around the fact that Pictomancer exists, or taking a Pictomancer is just going to make raids too easy. Or we're going to get into a scenario where we will just not have downtime mechanics anymore, because Pictomancer just benefits too much from downtime. Having a Pictomancer in your group versus not having it is an insane difference. So if you're doing this ultimate, just make sure you have a Picto. Go double caster if you have to. I've even seen people go 4 Pictomancers to make a point. But yeah, that class is just a little bit too strong at the moment, and I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it. And especially for this ultimate, like, it is just so incredibly busted. You're literally shooting yourself in the foot if you're not taking one. So yeah, that's kind of like my little rant on Pictomancer, I guess. It's too strong for this ultimate. Take it if you're still progging it. Take it if you're re-clearing it, I don't care. Like, you should just have one in your party, regardless of what you plan to do. That is just how strong the class is. Even if your Pictomancer player is not super good at Pictomancer, it doesn't need to be. Like, you just need to be on there and play kind of okay, and then you'll be fine. Especially in something like phase 4 where you can cleave as well, it is just ridiculous how strong that class is. But yeah, I think that kind of does it. So overall experience of this ultimate was pretty good. I enjoyed the fight, I enjoyed the music, I enjoyed the storyline that was being told. Going into phase 5, like having Gaia and Reen essentially cheering you on as you fight Pandora, even shouting at the top of their lungs at the end of the phase when they give you your limit break 3, and then as soon as you send it, they're just like screaming, ah, kill the boss. Feels incredibly good, especially for your very first clear where everybody's very pumped and excited. It was a very good experience to get through the fight. Looking at it from a spectator perspective as well, the first couple of days when people were progging it, whenever I had a break at work for like 10 minutes or something, I would pop open Twitch, go to the live stream that was going on that was following all the world first teams going for it. It was very exciting, just like waking up in the morning, oh, let's see how far people have gotten. Very good experience. Really hope that they keep making events like that. For Savage as well, like, it's very fun to kind of like follow world first like that. But it was certainly a very good experience for this ultimate as well. And yeah, I'm curious to see how that ends up going in the future as well. But overall, very happy with the content. Might be a bit easier than some of the other ultimates that we have had. But it's a fun fight, and that is all that I care about. And the weapons also look pretty good, so I'm very motivated to keep farming it to get a couple of those weapons as well. But that's of course just my opinion. Let me know in the comments what you think about the fight. Have you cleared it so far? Are you still progging? What are your thoughts on it so far? How do you enjoy it? Let me know down below. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.